Hey there, everybody. Jeff Danlick here with Our Curious World, bringing you another story of the mysterious, the unexplained, and the just plain weird. Today we're going to look at the most compelling evidence for Bigfoot's existence ever taken, the famous Patterson-Gimlin film. Unlike most videos about Bigfoot, however, I'm not here to tell you what to believe or disbelieve, but lay out both sides of the argument and let you make up your own mind. So if you're ready, let's get into it. I know that the Patterson film taken in 1967 and supposedly shows Bigfoot walking across a creek bed towards the forest has been debated to death. So I guess one more video won't make any difference. Anyway, almost every video on YouTube that shows the film is either intent on convincing you that it's just a guy in a monkey suit or that it's a real unknown animal of some kind. Rarely do they present both sides of the equation to explore some of the deeper questions in regard to this amazing and controversial piece of footage. I'm also especially close to this piece of film as it was the subject of my first published article that appeared in Fate magazine back in March of 2023, which is what started me on my writing career. So for those of you new to the phenomenon, on October 20th, 1967, the self-styled Bigfoot hunter Roger Patterson and a writing buddy, Bob Gimlin, set out on horseback looking for the creature near Willow Creek, California. And much to everyone's amazement or suspicion, they actually found it. What happened next set both the Bigfoot and the science community on their heels. Grabbing his rented 16mm camera out of his saddlebag, Patterson ran towards the creature and managed to steady the film long enough to get about 10 to 15 seconds of color footage of the beast as it walked across an exposed riverbank towards the forest. Quickly getting the film developed, within weeks he was showing it to various scientists and other interested parties around the country, each of whom weighed in with their opinion as to its authenticity. While most scientists, at least those who bothered to take a look at it, automatically dismissed it as a fake for various reasons, though there were a few notable exceptions, and the public stood divided on the subject, it has never been conclusively proven, or disproven for that matter, to be either a guy in a suit or an actual animal. Considering that the film has been studied in intricate detail by both believers and skeptics alike for decades, and that no final verdict has yet been rendered, or is ever likely to be, that's interesting in itself. This is especially curious when one considers the various Bigfoot videos that have been identified as hoaxes taken since then were quickly identified as such to the satisfaction of both skeptics and believers alike, making the fact that we're still talking about this bit of celluloid almost 60 years later significant. Now, I'm not going to be doing a frame-by-frame analysis of the video in an effort to either convince you it's real or a fraud. There are plenty of videos on YouTube that do that, a couple of which I consider to be among the best being listed in the description below. Instead, I want to look at the bigger picture, the motivations and possible explanations behind the footage to see how it could have been faked if it was faked, and what evidences we might look at for either way. And by the way, if you're interested in seeing my other video on Bigfoot that explores the question of why he is so hard to find, see the link in the description below. The first thing, or person, we need to look at is the person behind the footage, Roger Patterson himself. Who was this guy? What was he doing looking for Bigfoot in the first place? And most importantly of all, was there any big payoff for him at the end of the day? In other words, what reason would he possibly have had for faking such a film, and did it work out for him? So who was Roger Patterson? By all accounts, Patterson was a cowboy born in South Dakota who worked in the rodeos. Apparently, as a younger man, he was also something of a capable boxer as well. I can't find very much on his personal life online, but what I found says that he first became interested in the subject of Bigfoot when he read an article about the creature in True magazine in 1959. After that, he became something of a Bigfoot junkie, even to the point where he actually wrote a self-published book on the creature in 1966. The next year, he decided to film a docudrama about the beast and even got together a film crew and volunteer actors to shoot scenes from his film over Memorial Day weekend. though the picture was apparently never finished. So obviously we can tell that old Roger was a creative type and a huge Bigfoot file who was willing to put up his own money in an effort to prove the creature's existence. But does this prove he was a con man willing to do whatever it takes to find proof of the creature's existence? I don't know. There are those who claimed he was one of those people who might borrow a few $100s from you and forget to pay you back, or who wasn't beyond exaggerating or even playing a practical joke if the need arose. So he doesn't sound like a man of sterling character. What he sounds like to me is an eccentric entrepreneur with a big imagination and dreams of fame and fortune. But that doesn't in and of itself prove that he was willing to go to the point of creating a hoaxed film, though. Admittedly, he obviously had motive for doing so, all of which we will look at in more detail in a moment. However, for most people, the idea that Patterson was a bit shady is the end of the story, rendering any further discussion pointless. Move along, nothing to see here, folks. But I'm not so sure. The problem with taking the easy way out is that one still needs to explain how he managed to create a fake suit that is so convincing that people are still debating it today. And that on a shoestring budget at that, and without the special effects materials that allow Hollywood to create such believable costumes today. Remember, this was 1967, when guys wearing monkey suits were not all that hard to spot. At that point, the best ape-like special effects were those seen in the 1968 science fiction movie Planet of the Apes, which came out that following year. And even though the apes in that film are considered cutting-edge special effects at the time, you can still see that they are actors in very extensive makeup and suits. Plus, those suits were expensive to produce, even for Hollywood. So what are the chances that a guy like Roger Patterson would drive all the way to LA, have the resources to pay a special effects expert to create a convincing Bigfoot costume, and then get some poor sop to wear the thing while he took a few seconds of grainy footage of the beast? Here is where I find the real mystery. Let's say Patterson did find someone willing to don the costume so he could get his money shot. My first question is, how and when did Patterson get the guy to the spot? This is an issue I rarely see skeptics address. It's easy to say it was some guy in an ape suit, but what exactly would that entail? It's not just a matter of procuring a believable suit, but getting the guy up there, helping him into the suit, getting the shot, and then getting him safely back out of there. Remember, the spot where Patterson filmed his subject is not easy to get to. It is somewhat remote and largely inaccessible except on foot or by horseback, even today. Back in 1967, it was even less developed and more rugged, making Patterson's job of getting the guy up there even more of a challenge. Could it be done? Possibly. Probably even. But it would have meant that Patterson had to get the guy to the spot earlier that morning, help him into the costume, and tell him to wait by the edge of the creek bed for Patterson to show up. The problem with that, however, is that Patterson and his friend Bob Gimlin, whom we will talk about in a moment, had been riding for a couple of hours before they came upon the creature. Are we to assume, then, that the guy was willing to sit quietly inside his likely hot and heavy suit for literally hours, waiting to be discovered? Even the hardiest special effects artists usually have to remove some of the costume until just before filming to prevent heat stroke. If you don't believe that such suits are heavy, uncomfortable, smelly, and extremely difficult to wear for any length of time, go rent a gorilla suit, put it on, and sit in the woods for a few hours. You'll see. And then we have the issue of Patterson's witness to the whole affair, Bob Gimlin. Bob Gimlin was also a cowboy and a rodeo rider from Missouri who had met Patterson years earlier on the circuit. Striking up a friendship, several years later, Patterson asked him if he wanted to join him looking for Bigfoot. And probably out of a sense of, what the hell, I don't have anything better to do, he decided to accompany him and so became a witness to the whole event. An unbeliever at that point, Gimlin could only watch in shock while Patterson did his thing, all the while holding a fully loaded .30-06 in his hands. Now, unless he was in on the gag, a prospect he vehemently denies this day, and he's still alive and going strong at 93, how could Patterson have been so sure his friend wouldn't take a shot at the beast? No one, neither Patterson nor Gimlin, can really know how they will act in such a situation, and if old Bob had gotten spooked, he might have well blown away Patterson's suit-donning friend with all the messy repercussions that would entail. Further, if Patterson knew that he was filming a friend of his in an elaborate suit, wasn't he taking an extraordinary risk by not ordering Gimlin to hold his fire? Or for even allowing him to bring a rifle along in the first place? Fortunately, Bob held his fire while Patterson filmed, but what if he hadn't? The only way this would have worked was if Gimlin was not there. That way Patterson could have ridden to the spot with his Bigfoot standby, got him into the costume, got his money shot of the creature walking away, and then helped him out of the costume, after which they could have both have ridden off into the sunset. Again, with Gimlin along, and assuming he was not a party to the shenanigans, the whole plan blows up. Of course, it's possible that Patterson could have had another accomplice bring the guy in the suit to the spot ahead of them, but no one has ever made such a claim. For that matter, the Bigfoot guy could have ridden up there beforehand alone and got himself into the costume, though that'd be quite a task. But even if he did, you still have the problem of Gimlin's loaded rifle to contend with. Either way, Patterson would have been one trigger squeeze away from complete disaster. So let's recap here. Roger Patterson, Bigfoot hunter extraordinaire, gets someone to make a Bigfoot suit with massive female breasts, no less, that is so good that no one to date has been able to replicate it, and has been repeatedly tried, believe me. Then he gets a friend to put it on, wait for him for hours in the middle of nowhere so he can take a few awkward steps in front of the camera, all the time hoping he doesn't get shot, who then runs into the woods where once again he hides while he waits for someone, in this case one Roger Patterson, to come and rescue him. However, Patterson and Gimlin hung around the area for some time afterwards, hoping to get another glance of the creature, and even came back later to make some plastered castings of its oversized footprint, making it unclear just when Patterson would have had time or opportunity to recover his extraordinarily accommodating friend. He would have needed a third accomplice, again, like I said, who has yet to come forward. Now, to be fair, in 1998, an acquaintance of Roger Patterson named Bob Hieronymus admitted that he was the guy in the suit, claiming that he didn't want to come forward earlier because he thought he might have gotten in trouble for committing fraud. Although I'm not aware of any ordinances that makes dressing up like Bigfoot against the law, but you never know. Unfortunately, Bob's description of the suit he supposedly wore tended to contradict with that seen in the footage, and other details he recounts are a bit fuzzy, which is only natural in that he was recounting an event that occurred 3 decades earlier. But why would anyone admit having been the guy in the suit if they weren't? Hard to say, but it is a fact that for the next few years after he made his admission, Bob made something of a name for himself working the paranormal radio and podcast rounds, and otherwise hitting the Bigfoot circuit. It should be remembered that fame is often its own reward. It's just a thought. So if it's not a fake, how do we explain it? Easy. 3 words. Sheer dumb luck. In Roger Patterson, we have a man so obsessed with Bigfoot that he is willing to spend much time and effort and what meager resources he had to go looking for the thing. At that time, the Bigfoot legend wasn't as big as it is now, and so he might have actually been naive enough to think he could head out on horseback and track it down like a bear. Of course, it wasn't all a matter of luck. He did do several things right. First, he did some fairly extensive research trying to determine a good spot to look for such a creature, which is what brought him to Bluff Creek, an area rife with reports of sightings of the creature. Then he and Gimlin wisely chose to ride into the area on horseback, which is perhaps the most efficient and quiet means of traveling through a forest. Plus, he had the foresight to pack a good quality film camera in a place where he could retrieve it quickly in an emergency. That's not luck. That's called good planning. Now, this is where the luck takes over, though. Much to their own surprise, the duo actually come upon a large female Sasquatch squatting at the edge of a river, causing their horses to bolt. But how did the Sasquatch not hear them coming? Aren't they supposed to be known for their keen senses? Well, yes, but even the wiliest creatures sometimes make a mistake. Perhaps it simply failed to notice them until the last second, perhaps because their approach was muffled by the sound of the flowing river water. Further, 3 years earlier, a flash flood had inundated the river, gouging huge chunks of forest away from the riverbank, and leaving a wide sandy stretch of open area, forcing the creature to traverse some fairly open terrain before it can reach the safety of the forest. This gave Patterson just enough time to retrieve his camera and get his shot. Had the encounter happened almost anywhere else along the river where the tree line might have been closer, then he would not likely have had time to get his footage. Take away any of these three elements then, the quiet approach, the noisy river, the open stretch of deforested riverbank, and Patterson is left with just another story of what might have been. Sometimes one doesn't need to be good, they just need to be lucky, and I wonder whether that was what Roger Patterson was on that bright, sunny day in October of 1967. So where does that leave us? Is the Patterson film a fake, as its many detractors insist? Or is it the real McCoy, as so many of its defenders maintain? Much of how you answer that has to do with the man behind the camera, Roger Patterson, and how confident you are in the man and his story. Since so much of the authenticity of the video falls onto him and what he might have done on that October day in 1967, it's important that we delve deeper into the man himself and see what we might discover. We asked the question earlier as to whether or not Patterson was the kind of person who might have tried something like this. I don't know. Possibly. The problem is that we're trying to imagine what a man one never knew personally, who has been dead for over 50 years, might have been capable of doing on a particular day, which is always an iffy proposition. All we can do is refer to what has been written and said about him in the intervening years, which is that he did have a reputation for being just a tad dishonest, at least according to anecdotal stories told by those who knew him personally. He apparently had difficulty paying off creditors and made promises of financial compensation to people he never followed through on. While I think charges that he was a liar and a con man seem a bit harsh and are likely overblown, it does appear that he was not a man known for his honesty. Of course, the man died of cancer in 1972, so he can't defend himself, forcing us to take the word of others as evidence of his questionable character. I leave it to you to be the judge and jury. Of course, the real question is not whether he was the type of person who might have had the incentive to produce a hoax, but whether the man possessed the skills to pull something like this off. This is where it gets a little more uncertain. Though there are those who maintain that he was just a dumb cowboy, he apparently was more than that. For instance, he appeared to have been a decent artist and was good with his hands as well as had a good imagination. However, that is far from proof that he was capable of perpetrating a hoax of this caliber. While not outside the bounds of possibility, I think it would have been beyond the ability of most people, even those that are quite clever, to pull off. Plus, there's the financial situation to take into account. Patterson was not a wealthy man, at least before the film, so it's uncertain and indeed extremely unlikely that he had the financial resources required to get a suit of such quality built, or whom he would have known who could have been persuaded to produce it. It's possible he did, but I think it's extremely unlikely. But didn't Patterson make a boatload of money off his footage, thereby proving it was all a way to make a quick buck? Well, he did make money off the footage. It didn't exactly make him a wealthy man. His obsession over the creature was such that he blew through whatever revenue he received off the film pretty quickly, looking for the thing. For example, he spent many thousands of dollars pursuing the lead he received from a U.S. Air Force airman stationed overseas who claimed that there was a live Bigfoot being held inside a monastery in Thailand. The lead turned out to be a hoax while the airman was diagnosed with mental health issues. But that was the sort of naive exuberance the man apparently showed in the aftermath of his experience. He also had other legal issues to deal with, as well as several people, including Bob Gimlin, who wanted to sue him for money owed him. By the way, if Gimlin knew the film was a hoax, could he have just threatened to go public with the fact in an effort to extort the money he felt Patterson owed him? Why maintain to this day that it was legitimate if he knew it wasn't? Well, so could Patterson have done it for fame? Well, the footage did get his name out there. He got just as much flack for it as he did applause. While some did consider him a courageous man, many more mocked him and even accused him of being a liar and a con man, which is not the sort of fame anyone would normally want. It should also be noted that he would have received the same degree of fame and fortune regardless of whether the footage was real or a hoax. The only difference is that if it were a hoax, he would have had to spend the rest of his life desperately trying to cover up the fact. If authentic, however, he could let the chips fall where they may without fear of being exposed as a fraud. Finally, it should be remembered that Patterson went to his grave insisting that the footage was authentic. Though some claim he made a deathbed confession before his death from cancer in 1972, this is just another one of those stories that someone threw out there to see if it would stick. The fact is that there is no record of or witness to such a confession, which would have been the thing to do if one was on the verge of meeting their maker. It's also important to note that the other witness to the event, Bob Gimlin, maintains resolute to this day that the encounter happened, despite the difficulties he and his family has endured over the years and the intense pressure directed against him to recant his story. In the end, what it all really comes down to is not whether the Patterson film is authentic, but whether it is possible that a species of large, hairy, bipedal creatures we call Bigfoot could actually exist. If you believe it's possible, or at least open to the possibility, then the Patterson film could well be authentic footage of a real Sasquatch. If you think such a premise is impossible, however, then the image can only be someone in an ape suit, for there is no other explanation available. It's really just a question of whether there is room in your worldview for the mysterious, the unexplained, and the just plain weird, or whether you can only believe what you can see with your own eyes or comprehend with your own mind. It's up to you to render the final verdict. Say, if you like this video, I'd appreciate if you hit that like button below and consider subscribing so you can see more stories like this from our curious world. So here's your final thought of the day. Bigfoot may be rare, but not as rare as an honest politician. Bye for now. I'll see you next time.